喜び shonen.
Hey everyone, thanks for tuning back in for another episode with the Otaku crew. As always, I invite you to follow us on all our major platforms, and those being the typical YouTube, Spotify, Instagram, Think Otaku Crew, Twitter, Think Otaku Crew, and as well as our Facebook page, the official Otaku Crew. Lastly, don't miss out on our public Discord server where you will see some rather interesting memes being posted on the daily by our very own Tensa. Yeah, the crazy guy who's always talking in our episodes and just can't stop butting in. It's okay, Tensa. I love you though. As
Oh my god.
There's the maniacal laugh we all love and adore. As you all know by now, I'm Leifon, and I've hosted a majority of the episodes, and I'm joined by my fellow weebs. And so I'm gonna give it up to Andy.
Hi.
Hi.
I feel the energy from you right now, like you're tired.
It's been a long day. Spooky season, Gotta get ready.
Very true. Manalo boy, can you make up for this lack of energy?
What's poppin', guys? What's poppin'?
All right, finally, Tensa, can you stabilize this energy?
I swear, you guys look like you're lacking calcium from your bones. You guys need some milk.
Oh! Somebody! Oh! He needs some milk!
Maybe
a
I
lot
do.
of milk. Yes, and grab a couple of monsters because you guys seem dead.
I'd kill for a monster right now.
Monster actually makes my hand shake. But on that note, I'm glad you said the word monster because this episode is our Halloween episode dedicated to the month of horror, more or less. In my opinion, it's not much of a month of horror anymore. It's more like
Spooky.
I don't know. Yeah, spooky.
It's just COVID halting the actual team. But rest assured, if in Mexico there's still Santa Muerte, then this is still the month of skeleton and monsters.
Oh, I like the analogy there, Tensa. But as I was saying, this episode is dedicated to the month of Halloween. And this time around, the question we'll be discussing is that what are some of the major similarities or differences between Japanese horror depicted in anime or manga versus horror depicted in Western films and or series? Our job this time around is going to be just to see how each canon sort of depicts and utilizes the horror genre in their respective forms. And so I wanted to actually discuss something I found very profoundly interesting about horror in the Western canon. Now, once again, this is not a majority answer. It's just some of the things I've noticed as I've watched horror movies in the past up until now. They've steadily gotten worse, but that's a different topic entirely. Now, the American canon I found dedicates horror mostly to slasher films, gore, and an unnecessary amount of jump scares. But I understand where this is coming from because many of the slasher films are actually adopted from actual history. Those serial killer documentaries you see on Netflix, which a lot of people have a massive interest in. I guess I missed the hype train on that one. Or sometimes tragedies like the Texas Chainsaw Massacre, which went on to become a film, and well, multiple films, if to give it all respect. At the same time, it's not to say that the West has just stayed in this type of sphere. They've actually expanded to adapting other horror folk tales from different countries. Like what was it? I very recently I watched The Ring and The Grudge, but the original Japanese adaptation, and then saw the American
Ju-on.
version of it. Yeah, Ju-on, thank you.
And Ringu, because that one is still like the ring, but like in all katakana, so it's kind of funny.
Pretty much. And I found it didn't do itself justice or any homage towards the original Japanese version, but that's once again just my opinion. But so far, this has just been me like sort of shitting on the the Western usage of horror. I don't mean for that to come off on any way. This is just once again my analysis of just that horror in that aspect seems to be slightly limited. I've seen the expansion into other realms like Candyman by Jordan Peele, and what was it? What was it? Us. Great films, of course, but I
Oh
found
yes,
oh,
Us was
see
fun.
that it
Us
was.
was fun.
We could dress up as that for Halloween. There's our idea.
That would be fun. But you're definitely right, Leifon. There's a different big distinction between Japanese horror and Western horror because they take two very different directions. I find it really interesting how Japan horror, a lot of it has been cultivated based off Japanese folklore, as you were saying. But if you think about where the West has gone, Western folklore, which, if anyone remembers, like the Grimm tales and all those things were actually pretty dark, depressing, we turned that into Disney. We turned folklore into Disney. They turned folklore into more horror, which I think is interesting.
It's actually debatable because yes, Disney has a bad tendency of turning old fairy tales, which were in and of themselves horror stories, to teach about stuff. It's more that, but I would actually argue that those old horror tales are less horrific and more quote unquote fantasy, if that makes any sense. In the sense that this is more of a Tolkien story that you'll see in Lord of the Rings. But at the time, that was absolutely horrific.
Yeah, I mean, like, standards for horror
yeah,
have,
you're right. Definitely.
gone up since the 17th century or whatever, right? Like,
Yep.
in terms of just imagining all the horrific things that can happen in a story, right?
Yep.
People have definitely pushed the limits there.
Well, I'm just saying the direction of old Western folklore, it didn't start out to be horror, but because it was more used as lessons to be taught to. It was more fantasy. It was targeted towards adults originally. But from the direction that folklore is taken, based on if you're comparing Western and Japanese culture, specifically from the folklore perspective, it's interesting how Japanese horror came more from folklore and then in Western folklore merged into something the opposite of horror, moved into something more targeted towards children.
Mm-hmm.
Yep.
And actually donning the whole genre of children's books. But back to Japanese horror, it's so unique in its own way, where it's more supernatural and it's more of a, not thriller, psychological, that's it. I find Japanese horror in whatever type of area that genre goes into, it's the psychological aspect to me is my favorite part of Japanese horror.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I see where you're coming from when you say the psychological, because at least from some of the horror anime I have seen, there's often, how do I say it? Creators are utilizing an atmospheric and suspense type of technique to invoke that type of fright. And so, for example, I don't know if you guys have seen this anime. It's been rebooted, if I'm correct. What was it? English name is When They Cry.
Oh, Higurashi when they cry or Umineko when they cry?
Higurashi.
I like both of them.
Well, that's the thing. If whoever has seen Higurashi, they see that it's like how should I describe it? The main character, when he's told not to do something, he does it, and then he's like, "Oh shit, I did it." You see the pressure on his face. You see everything is about to go batshit crazy, and
Did
that's
you know
based on the curse that goes on in the town.
Do you
So
know
sort
that
of
that's
like that.
originally a visual novel as well?
Yep. Yes, I did.
In fact, that's why I ask whether it's Higurashi or Umineko when they cry, because they're from the same studios, and in fact, I even thought that they were like related, like in the sense of same universe, because they have like the titles are so similar
True.
that
True.
I would have swore that it was kind of the same story, kind of, but in an other place. But when you learn that those were two different stories, and both of them were positively horrific for two different reasons.
That's very accurate. Those things are pretty horrific when they're in their own respects, and at the same time, I don't know. Would you say that they're slept on?
They are. I think it has to do with the fact that they were mostly visual novels at the beginning, and I think that the anime adaptation was not publicized as much, so it's like I would say that it could have been more popular, but it really wasn't. And to be fair, I didn't hear of much advertisement of either, except for stuff after the series were done. Like some games were, but at that point they kind of removed a lot of the horror element, and I'm just like, what is this thing?
There we go. And so, whoever is currently tuned in listening to our episode, if you do have time, the When They Cry, the Higurashi version, has been rebooted visually. I've seen a few episodes, very, very beautifully done. The same WTF moments as before, but just more appealing to the eyes, if anything. And so, with that distinction that we've drawn between Western and Japanese horror, I would like to start to transition to some of the Japanese animes or mangas, depending on my panelists, that we have seen or are watching, and what we found was the horror element in that. Because horror itself is a vast area to cover. There's no, well, there is a somewhat distinction, but multiple elements could go into it to make horror what it is for different audiences and so forth. And so the one that I want to discuss was it's an old anime I found on Netflix back when Netflix Canada was like starting. Well, sorry, not starting. I want to say early 2010s when Netflix had an anime catalog but didn't have as many. This is one of the few that stuck out. It's, I believe, 6 or 7 episodes, an hour long each. It's called Ghost Hunt, and the studio that made it, no surprise here, JC Staff. Now, here's something I didn't know about the anime. Just a little background. So the author is what's her name? It's oh yeah, her name is Fuyumi. I couldn't recall the first name, but Fuyumi, I guess, was the last name. She's a Japanese novelist married to Yukito Ayasuchi, who is the writer behind the story, if you guys know it, Another, and then a later anime adaptation. So two people who are profoundly into the horror genre getting married together. That's goals right there. I'm just saying.
By the way,
Yes.
Fuyumi Ono.
Thank you.
My man.
So, Ghost Hunt is basically like the Western version of Paranormal Activity, but better because it's anime. Just saying. And so what happens is wow, I'm forgetting the main characters' names, but basically you have this guy who's a paranormal detective slash researcher. He comes to a school and their old campus, like, the typical new campus high school, old campus high school. The old campus is being quote unquote haunted, and he has to go figure it out. But the thing is, the principal goes ahead and hires other people, hires a monk, an exorcist, and a priestess, and himself, the paranormal researcher. And whoever figures it out, I believe they got a reward or something from the principal, whatever the case was. And so they go about trying to figure it out, become friends, blah blah blah, or they start working for him, etc. And then later episodes starts to show that there is much more to this than meets the eye. So I'm not going to spoil too much of the first episode or the later ones. However, this was only the start because they depict the paranormal atmosphere in the first episode. They do it really well, but then at the very end they show that it's like it's not paranormal, man. It's just this is science. This is proven, and so there is horror to a degree, but it's rationally explained up until I think the fourth or fifth episode, where you get a glimpse into the horror aspect, the paranormal that cannot be proven by science. And so, just to give a quick summary of that as well, I would label it as a vampire episode. Basically, there's this giant mansion which has been built on top of, like, it started as a small house, and then it gradually more and more things kept getting added to it to the point it became a mansion. So the old building was sealed inside, and there's this demon or spirit that's haunting the haunting the entire house, saying, "I don't want to die," and all that. It's like an old man covered in blood and all that. So that is when we enter the horror aspect, is because it what the creators do is that as you try to go figure out, is this a curse, is this real, they really try limit your view. It gets darker and almost like almost like tunnel vision, so you know you're in the moment. You're like, oh shit, is this happening? What if this is true? And all that. So with that being said, this is one of the major points I did want to discuss, is that curses or spirits in Japanese anime and manga profoundly aren't ones that are always resolved, like in Western depictions. For example, Supernatural, you burn the bones, the spirit is free. Done. Japanese anime is like, okay, I'm cursed. Oh shit, how do I break this curse? Ju-won being one of the major examples. Like, okay, she left a curse. How do we break it? Can we break it? What are we gonna do? And so there's multiple questions being left, like what can we do to resolve the aspect? Yeah. And so with that being said, I want to actually give it up to my boy Minato boy, because I don't know if you knew, Minato, that Fuyumi, the woman who wrote the Ghost Hunt novel, she also wrote the original novel for the topic you'll be discussing.
Oh, that's funny. Okay.
All right, so take it away, man.
So the anime that I wanted to talk about was kind of an older one. I don't remember exactly when it was made. I know I watched it like when I was in high school, so like more than 10 years ago now. But it's called Shiki, which I'm pretty sure just translates directly to vampire. And that's basically what the show is about, is vampires. It's a pretty old one, so I mean, spoiler warning, but I'll just give like a synopsis. Basically, like a town, like there's one vampire that no, so there's a girl in the town that gets bit by a vampire, becomes a vampire, and from there, she bites people in the town. And throughout the season, or the series rather, because it was a pretty short one, more and more of the town are becoming getting turned into vampires, right? And we follow the main character trying to figure out if there's a way to reverse this and save the town. But more and more, like, the odds keep getting stacked against her. I don't even remember who the main characters were, because I watched this so long ago. I just remember like the general plot. But the main characters were, trying to figure out how to counteract this, while like the odds were getting stacked against them more and more. And then you had like these big lieutenants in the vampire,
Covenant?
Sorry?
Like a covenant?
Yeah, I guess you would call them that, right? Because like you had the new ones that were the townspeople, but you had vampires that were vampires for a long time. So I guess, yeah, you'd call that a covenant. They show up to help, like, make sure that the town stays turned, obviously. And so, eventually they find a way to counteract it, I think. But all throughout, like, you definitely have horror elements, because not only do you have the psychological aspect of the fight against these creatures, right? You also have the gore that they were causing, where they were, because vampires have to eat, right? Sometimes they turn people into vampires to join the army, but sometimes they just eat people because that's what they like to do. And the show was not like afraid of making sure you knew just what they were getting up to, right? So I found that it was a really like, looking back on it, it's a really interesting anime for horror, because like they do kind of both, where they don't skimp out on the gore, but they also make it sort of like a psychological thing too, because they focused a lot on like the mind games, trying to figure out who was a vampire, trying to even figure out like what the heck they were, what their weaknesses were, because they were in sort of, I guess, like kind of like The Walking Dead, sort of situation where they didn't know what vampires were, more or less, and they kind of had to learn along the way. Yeah, just a really interesting series. I'd definitely recommend it. It was a good watch.
Everyone be ready for that last episode. My God, that's when shit hits the fan.
Yeah. Yeah, that's what I liked about it a lot, was like it was a really, like, you could feel things building up as the show went on, and then it kind of just like climaxes really, really well at the end of the series.
That's true. And actually, something I want to say, if I recall Shiki correctly in the first episode, is that the vampires that move in, everyone's saying, "Oh, this European family, sorry, this family moved in, made it very European-y, their home and everything." And it's interesting because, Tensa, correct me if I'm wrong, but vampires is a concept from Europe, isn't that correct?
Yes, it's actually. You might actually laugh, but the idea that it's a concept from the Northern Europe in like Transylvania, Ukraine, and other parts north towards the north, they already had vampire concepts from the get-go, which had to do with the fact that when people are buried into crypt into the cold, basically the bodies kind of bloat themselves and you push on them and they can kind of spit blood out their mouths, hence the idea of them drinking fresh vampire blood.
That's cool. I didn't know that.
But we have like so many names. It was just not called a vampire. Like, for example, it could be called a striga in Romania, and it just so happened that vampire was more of an 1800 concept, like the term itself. And in fact, it's just all over Europe, but England managed to popularize it.
Yeah, and I'm glad you agree with me on this, Tensa. And this just goes to show how animes, they can, when they adapt something, they have either two things they can do. Either they can do a half-ass, or they can do it like really well. And I would say Shiki is one of those examples where it takes the small details and implements it, which gives it that legitimacy almost.
Yeah, they were focused on the rules of how vampires worked, right? Like based on the lore, like having
The
to
old
be
lore,
in
in fact.
fight.
The old lore, in fact.
Yeah, exactly, which I found was really interesting, like having to be invited into a house before they could actually enter it. And like some of the abilities that they had, like I think they had hypnosis or mind control, that kind of thing.
No sparkling in the sun though.
No.
No. We're talking about the good stuff like Nosferatu.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, actually, it was really based on that kind of thing, which was really really cool.
And for anyone who is currently listening, if you ever have time, read the Dracula by Bram Stoker. Really well done. And so, with that being said, Andy, I know you had something else entirely to talk about. I'm curious. Tell me what you want to discuss.
Oh, yeah, I want to talk about the Jinji Ito collection, which, for any of you guys who don't know, Jinji Ito, who is a very popular Japanese horror manga artist. He's very much, well, anyone who knows horror in the Japanese horror community should know who he is, but he's mostly, to me, I think he's mostly well known for his body deformation panels. Like that's like the core of his horror, is making humans look so inhuman and freaky that it's disturbing. That's what makes his stuff so unique to me. And specifically the Jinji Ito collection is a horror anthology series of his work. So each episode has two different stories, all unique to one another. Like they don't have anything to do with each other. It's a new protagonist every story. And they're all very, very unique stories altogether. And I really, I think they're really, it kind of highlights a bit of an easy look into Japanese horror genre from a different perspective. Like what you guys are talking about mostly stuff from vampires is pretty much the biggest theme that I've been seeing from all of you, from you guys. This one I think is I don't know. Have you guys ever seen the? Do you guys know much of his collection, or have you guys watched any of the Jinji Ito episodes?
Not the collection itself, but I am a fan of Uzumaki.
Yes, that's right. You said you were.
And that's what I actually do like about Junji Ito specifically. It's the fact that he likes to make regular things very grotesque, if I may.
Yes, exactly.
And it's this kind of thing where everything's just normal, then you just suddenly cross the uncanny valley, and then you just freak out because nothing is normal at all.
Yeah, you have no idea what direction it's going to take because it kind of throws you into the story most of the time. And you really have to like pay attention to figure out where it's going, but you'll never really know. It's very unique, the stories.
I miss the spider shark.
What?
And
I'm
Would
already
you care to
afraid of
explain that to
spiders.
the class?
I don't want to know.
In Uzumaki, there's a scene where people are just trying to just go and hide in an apartment, and there's a literal shark that just pops into the house with spider legs.
What?
And this has been immortalized into a meme with it saying, "I'm the goddamn Batman."
I feel like I think I saw a panel of that, but it was...
You saw the
I don't
meme
know.
version of it. You probably saw
I
it.
definitely seen a meme or something similar, but it was come on and slam and welcome to the jam, but it was just the shark bursting through the
Yes.
door. Yes.
It's exactly that shark.
There you go. So any of you meme lovers out there, now you know where it's from. But yeah, it's very fun. The whole collection itself, it's something that you could definitely just kind of watch on your off time. So I would definitely recommend watching it to any of the viewers who don't know too much about Japanese horror or don't know too much about the genre. I think the Jinji Ito Collection is a very good place to start, but also a very interesting place to start because if you have no idea what you're getting into, you'll still have no idea what you're getting into by the time you're done. And that's the magic of it.
There was a meme. I don't know if you guys have seen it. It's a comparison. It's Junji Ito at the top. He's just smiling and everything, and then you see his panel right beside him. It's like, oh my. And then Miyazaki at the bottom, where he's just like grumpy, and then you see his panel, which is like, whoa. So it's like expressions. It really says something in that meme.
It's actually that's not much of a meme. In fact, I will actually explain what that actually is. It's an actual thing in Japan where the happiest artist makes the darkest things, and the darkest artist makes the happiest things. You see that in visual K music all the time.
Wait, visual K. What is that? Okay, I'm not sure here.
It's imagining J-Rock with dresses. Like think about Malice Miser. Think about X Japan. No, there's so many groups actually. In fact, I've showed you some of them a few years ago. One called Kiryu, Under My Dragon, and the thing is that you'll see their normal music, you see their normal attire, and then you see like how they manage to do very happy music, and you're just not expecting it.
And so when you say you've shown me this years ago, I'm gonna be perfectly honest with you. I was half there every time you showed me something on your phone. It's like, oh, it's just Tensa showing me something else.
You don't remember Nijigen Complex by My Dragon, where there's a guy dressed up as a bee?
No.
Oh, that's sad. But that was a perfect example because that was probably their happiest songs, and usually they're more a little bit a lot like Deer and Grey, I guess.
Well, this is an opportunity. So Tensei, you and I will grab Leifan, we'll put him on the couch, and you could show him all the memes he never paid attention to throughout all the years.
Oh dear. I'm sorry, Leifan.
Wow, Andy, you'd really do that to him?
It's the spirit of Halloween.
That's fair.
If anything, she's doing me a favor.
I could just picture
Yeah,
it.
well,
She just cuffs me to the couch, puts tape on my eyelids, and makes me just look at a big screen. Well, with that being said, with that interesting image I've painted for our audio listeners as well as our future visual watchers,
if anyone
torture.
wants to draw that, that'd be great.
With that being said, torture. The theme of torture in that image that I've just painted very well. It's another thing in Japanese horror that I wanted to actually cover. It's really difficult to summarize, so I'm gonna give it to Andy since I know her to be the torture expert.
Oh God, now I got to explain that. Okay, so you know how in school you always have this one topic you learn in school that you somehow memorized and have a big extensive knowledge on? For me, it was the ethics of torture, and I've never forgot that information since.
I
So,
feel like that's very telling.
oh great.
I'm
If you
suddenly
were a-
very happy that we're recording this in Discord and not in person.
If you were all about torture methods, I'm all about executions. Every different types of them.
Ooh, well, this could be a fun topic for after the podcast. I'm excited. We'll compare notes.
For sure, for sure.
So, what part of torture exactly did you want me to cover on Leifon? What direction did you want me to go? Because I could go down a couple rabbit holes, and I'd like to stay on topic.
All right, no problem.
And maybe not
if-
get demonetized in the process. Cough,
Yeah,
cough.
that too.
Yeah, it's a good idea.
Well, how about this? I'm sure we've all seen the Tokyo Ghoul series, especially season 1, where Kaneki is getting tortured.
Yes.
Now there is a lot of blood and gore in that, but there is a psychological horror like that's ongoing, especially Kaneki being the one on the receiving end of that. So Andy, tell me, in the spirit of that, how was it being used correctly from everything we've discussed so far?
Yes, absolutely. Torture is a very interesting tactic you can go when it comes to horror. Personally, there's certain places in horror, specifically Western horror, where they took torture in a way that just I did not enjoy. Like Saw. I don't think Saw is a good example of torture in horror, but in with Tokyo Ghoul, because Japanese horror is very psychological, torture itself is extremely psychological because it's a dehumanizing action for both parties, the people doing the torturing and the person getting tortured. It's both dehumanizing. And as you watch Kaneki get tortured, you could see his humanity leave him because the only thing trying to keep himself from actually going the ghoul route was his humanity. And then once he lost his humanity after all that torture, he went full crazy ghoul, you know? And but I don't know how many other examples but I don't have many examples of where I've seen a lot of torture in anime, but then again, I haven't watched a lot of horror anime in a long time.
I actually have a recent one.
Yes.
So, Jujutsu Kaisen, like, it might not be as obvious an example, but spoiler for a really great anime that everyone should be watching. The humans that get transfigured or transformed, right, into curses, right? That's basically putting them through torture, right? Like, they get turned into these like things, but they can still kind of feel the pain of what they've become, right? And like the show makes sure that like that they're in pain and that they, right, like they're asking, please kill me, because they're in pain of what they've become, right? And this triggers a response in God, the main character's name, whose name I'm forgetting now.
Itadoro Yuji.
There you go, Yuji.
Oh, I thought you were going to say Goto.
No, Yuji, right? Like he seeing this has a reaction to it, right? So I think that's actually a pretty good example of like torture used in anime to like further explore a character's like psychological state, and also like, you know, obviously put the viewer in some psychological discomfort, as most horror does, right?
Yeah. Oh, you're totally right. You know, I take my statement back earlier of not knowing many animes with using torture, because now that you mention that, I could think of a probably good plethora of animes who used psychological torture in a way to as character development, you know?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, like it wasn't just like to make the viewer kind of like struggle, but also like the main character, because of the situation that he was being placed in, right? But also like it was just a kind of horrifying thing that they had been transformed into. Another example, because I just finished watching Full Metal Alchemist Brotherhood, and the captured souls that get incorporated into Envy's body, right? That's actually a very similar situation. It doesn't have the same like weight to it that it does in Jujutsu Kaisen, but it was definitely really, really off-putting the way that they animated all those nasty bodies, or like parts of Envy's body, right?
Basically showing that everything is still conscious there, which is kind of insane.
Exactly, yeah. So that was like another kind of example of that sort of thing. Like it's more subtle. You wouldn't necessarily think of it as torture, but I think it's a pretty good example.
That's the thing. It's because the type of series is not torture, so it's hard to actually pinpoint it. But I will argue that the experience that Envy victims had to go through, and they're still not dead, is completely horrific, if that makes any sense to you.
Yeah, exactly. Like FMAB is not a horror series, but it's got some elements of that kind of thing, right?
Yes, that's where we're going.
Yeah, for sure.
With that being said, there was one other I found. Have you guys heard of the one called, if the English name, the King's Game or King's Game?
Haven't heard of that. No.
No?
I heard
Okay.
of King's
Haven't heard of that. King's Game. Sounds
Yeah,
cool.
so it's based off the Japanese game like Osama something. Like if you lose, you have to do what the king says type of thing. So this is very similar, except what happens is that, yeah, Tensa is picking up what I'm laying down, but I'm gonna tell you guys.
You mean
So what
you
happens
mean
is,
you mean the one with the movie, right?
no, it's not the movie. No.
Okay. We're not talking about the same thing, because
So
I thought it was that one.
So basically, everyone gets a random text. No, it's not that one. So you got your typical MC who's a survivor of the original King's Game. He comes to a new school, blah blah blah. Fast forward, and all of a sudden, everyone in his classroom gets a message saying, "The King's Game has begun. Here are the rules. You disobey, you die," type of thing. And so it's only this particular classroom, and so the first few things that everyone has to do are pretty lighthearted, simple, but then it starts to get darker and darker, and people start to panic. So psychological torture at its max, so saying cut off your finger, or I don't know, stab your best friend type of things going on. So this is the horror element with psychological horror being slowly inserted in. It's a build-up. It's not even like instantly do this, you die. It's like, no. It's like, oh, he's not serious. The game's not real, but we're going to do it for the fun of it. Then they see what happens. So with everything we have
That's
been
pretty
saying,
cool.
pretty much, and I wouldn't recommend it honestly, because it goes really downhill afterwards. I don't even know how I finished it.
All right, that's good to know.
Oh.
Okay. But based on that, I think with all that we've said so far about horror itself, that multiple things can branch out of horror as well as go on to make it. We have your typical blood and gore, folklore, suspense, thriller. There's just so many avenues that go into making it. So far, we've
Oh.
come to that conclusion, right?
No, actually.
Oh, okay.
You mean, of course, there's thriller, but there's also like new things as well. In fact, how about that I actually present you my subject, actually?
Oh, my bad. I'm so sorry. I'm so
Yeah.
sorry, Denson.
I thought
Take
so.
it away.
You thought you could get away with.
I'll actually give you two because both of them are quite short.
Go for it.
The first one will be just a second. I forgot its name already. Domu by the creator of Akira, Katsuchiro Otomo. So everybody, if you're a fan of Tetsuo Kaneda, it's definitely the story for you. In this case, I can argue that it is quite normal, uncanny to a certain degree, and definitely psychological. But what makes it psychological is really the mentality of the two people involved with said psychic powers. Because it's basically a murder mystery in literally 6 chapters. So I'm still disappointed about 6 chapters really. But it tells of a story of an old man toying with people's life because he just sees people's lives as a game. And obviously, what makes it insane is that he was actually controlling people out of nowhere until, well, there's a little girl in that story that has basically the same powers but stronger, and you know where this goes. A lot of part in the stories was really a thriller because it started out as a murder mystery, like who is the murderer. Then the more you know about it, the more you see, like, for example, the unhinged suspect. Seeing how his mentality is a lot like anybody watch Cowboy Bebop?
Yes.
Do you remember Mad Pierrot from the episode 11, Pierrot le Fou?
Vaguely.
The mentality is basically like that. Imagine a old man-child that has all the powers in the world, and they just do what they want because they think that it has no content. It just turns in. What makes it funny to me is that story turned into a reverse horror. And what do I mean by reverse horror? I mean, usually you'd expect the antagonist to be what actually gives out the horror to the audience, but in fact, it was the exact opposite when, quote, the protagonist turned the entire concept of no, you're not invincible against him. Even though that I'm not gonna go too much further of it, I'll just delve into the other series as less of a horror, but really much of a thriller. Although that I personally wanted to speak about Parasite, that will not be for this podcast. Instead, I'll talk about Paranoia Agent. Any of you who remember Paranoia Agent, in fact?
Nope.
Sounds
Oh,
similar to something.
Shonen Bat. Really? No?
No?
Nope.
Nope. Sorry. Nothing.
Okay, this one is a purely psychological thriller, definitely, in the sense of it's a story made by Satoshi Kon, which was made just before his death. That series talks about a mystery where there's always this random guy, literally called Shonen Bat. I think that the official translation, they called it now Little Slugger. It's basically a guy on skates with a baseball bat, just bashing people on the head.
Oh.
Yes, but he just comes out of nowhere. Further into the episodes, you learn that he's not real. He's in fact a superstition or something like such. and near the end, you find out that it's really more of a woman's mental powers going haywire out of the need of avoiding responsibility. So she creates every problem around herself to literally avoid facing responsibility. Which, ironically, actually, I'm not even going to spoil it. But
That sounds interesting, though.
oh, it is. It's fun. Like, in between that, there's also mini episodes like a family spending the happiest days of their lives. But it turns out that they were not. As in, they were spending their happiest days of their lives in their car. It turns out that they did family suicide in that car.
Now that's fucked up.
Oh, God. Yeah,
That's
wow.
dark.
That's very dark. Jesus.
Oh no,
That's the evil laugh.
yes,
That's just
that was.
that's just Tensa being Tensa.
Oh no, that one was like the satisfaction. Oh my god, it's dark.
Oh, Lord. I was about to suggest, like, oh, let's do a Discord movie night, and then you said that. I was like, you know what? Maybe not.
Oh no, I will enforce that.
All right, I will handle it.
At least 1 or 2 episodes. Like I'm not expecting like an entire series. Like if we want an entire series, I actually recommend Shiki.
True.
Shiki or Parasite is basically what I would recommend for like a watch long for like an entire night or something.
Or
Oh,
Bloodstream.
Parasite's nice.
Oh yes, Parasite. And Parasite. I also like Parasite. Oh, you know what? I'm gonna talk a little bit about Parasite because I at
Go for
least
it.
know about the main premise and half of the series, really. And it's a lot like Jagan, another series that again I'm not gonna talk about now. This one's about an alien, possessing a guy's hand, and in fact, for fun's sakes, this parasite is even called right, because Migi is actually Japanese for right, so Migi Hidari, which is actually a fun idea. This story is fun with horror because most of the horror is not even about jump scares. It's really about the grotesqueries in and of itself, because of how people can lead regular lives, but unsuspectedly, they basically unveil their true form, which is just strange and weird. Like imagine like your right hand turn into a tentacle creature with sharp teeth about to eat you. In fact, there are other creatures that are like their whole bodies does that. So that being said, there is not really much jump scares in there because like there's an element of surprise, definitely, but it doesn't work like American jump scares, if you know what I mean. Like, I'm not going to go into the darkness and just startle you in the middle of the darkness. But sometimes there is a literal, this is not my final form at the last second. which actually works like a better effective jump scare because you were just not expecting it and you're in broad daylight and you're like, what the hell just happened?
Is it subtle? Because I think jump scares are best when they're subtle. The problem with jump scares in Western horror is that they time the jump scare with the music, so they tell you when to be scared. But subtle ones are nice.
That's the thing. It has, and that's a problem. That's a problem in Western horror media. It's the fact that they actually love to associate it with the score. And of course, if you're going to put an orchestra and you're going to time the score when the jump scares happens, well, what is there to be scared of, really? This is part of why I did love the old Halloween movies, for example. Because the old Halloween movies were really, really well made, but the remakes, I'm not a fan.
Well, Halloween, Michael.
Yeah, Michael Myers, yes. that being said, this follows into my genre of horror for Parasite because it's not about actually scaring you, but it's really about crossing the uncanny valley and having your most normal, everyday people, life, object twist themselves into an uncanny shape. Kind of like Uzumaki.
Yeah, I see the similarity there between Parasite and Junji Ito's works. I can see the body dysmorphia. I could actually
Yes.
ties in really
In
well.
fact, Uzumaki, in case you have not caught up to it, it actually means spiral, and a lot of the regular things turns itself into a spiral,
True.
which
Yeah,
is
there's a lot of stuff like that.
and 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 that's the thing. And I enjoyed it because it's not about the suspense, it's not about the jump scare, it's about how unsettling everything looks.
Like how uncomfortable it makes you.
Yes.
Yeah, it's the surrealism. If you have a what's that? There's a phobia in which you can't see, like where you don't like dots and spots and things like that. Tryptophobia? Yeah. If you have tryptophobia, don't watch any of his stuff. Don't read any of his stuff. You're not going to enjoy yourself.
Oh no,
'Cause
you're
I've-
gonna have a bad time.
Yeah, a very bad time because that makes up most of his what makes it so surreal is all the lines, all the circles, everything like that's being jumbled together in this face that doesn't look human anymore. It's just insane. It's so cool.
And the details to make that is just brilliant.
Yes, the details are insane. It's gorgeous, in fact, as creepy as it is. It's really it's very nice surrealism.
Does anyone else have anything to say as we've pretty much reached the end? Any of the final comments?
I have one question for everyone, just as a like a final little thing, but is there any aspect of horror in which you would not watch? Like, is there anything that scares you when it comes to horror? Because I'm not too scared of horror, but there are a couple things I wouldn't watch. Like, I don't like Saw because as someone who's an expert at torture, I don't like just straight up torture. Like the psychological torture is what's more interesting about that because you can do more with that in horror. But when it comes to Saw, it's like okay, it's excessive.
It's
But
not
anybody
even
else?
excessive. It's I'll explain the Saw concept. Because the entire point of Saw is that it's actually torture without a cause, really. Because I do feel like Saw, the one doing the torture is just sadistic and just wants people to suffer for no reason at all. Usually, torture, you're torturing them towards a means, toward like you want them to actually do something. So what I'm saying is that torture is often like historically, it's often used to make your subjects submit to you in some kind of way. But in this
Yeah,
case,
it's a way to break them.
yes, you're trying to break them slowly. In Saw, the problem with Saw is that you can't really break them because they either toughen up or order to pass the whatever test that they make, or they die. You don't see the mental breakdown. You don't have the chance of that, so you don't get to see the fruits of torture itself.
And you don't see the deformity that happens with the person who's doing the torturing because it's a doll, right? Isn't it just like a
Yeah,
doll on a
it's a doll.
tricycle? You don't actually see the person.
Yeah, you don't actually see the actual person that makes the torture, only his avatar, which does not work well because and I think
It,
that what
it
they were
takes
going
more
for,
tension out of it.
I think what they were going for is the idea that because it's a doll, it's no longer human, but it's just like I do feel like it's kind of like a failed experiment, and to me it's less horror and more boring gore because I do find it boring.
Yeah, it's exactly the same thing. So out of horror, that's the one thing I wouldn't watch because it's boring. But what about you, Monada Boy? Is there something about horror that you just don't watch or would never watch?
I was actually gonna say like gore for me, for the sake of gore, is not really something that I'm interested in watching. whereas like psychological horror is a lot more engaging. So I've actually gotten pretty into that recently, um, both in like anime and in Western media too. But like in general, uh, yeah, like I never liked gore. Um, like as a kid, it used to scare me a lot. Now, not so much, but like it just kind of feels like there's no point in watching it. Whereas, like at least with psychological horror, there's like some just like something to think about. There's a little more.
There's more
like,
connection
substance.
to it.
There,
there's
yeah,
more
there,
substance.
it's also because the work is usually given more thought into it.
Yeah.
Like when I was a kid, I would see like a head flying around and pool like in a bathtub, and I would be fucking scared for my life. But that's because but it was not for the aspect of how can I say it? It's not for the aspect of the scare itself. It's because I didn't want to end up like that guy. But you know, as a kid, yeah, you're a kid, right? I do think that a lot of gore is wasted effort because this is why I do not like the new Halloween because the new Halloween they kind of made it just gory, and I liked the old Halloween where, you know, I'm just gonna stab you through a fucking wall and you're going to just hang there. It wasn't much, but that was scary because the execution was more well taught. And that's the point. The point is that I think that horror is more effective when you combine multiple aspects together than when you're just focusing on solely on one aspect.
Yeah, definitely.
And I think that's the failure of a lot of new horror things today. Like at the very least, like even the things that has grotesqueries, they have an element of psychological, they have an element of gore. The gore is not necessarily kept to a minimum, but you know, it's not gratuitous. You know, it's not like as if you'll see gore in like 20 panels. Like it's really more of you learn about certain things, and as you learn more, everything is just more uncanny. And in fact, and it just becomes just strange and unrecognizable.
Speaking of strange and unrecognizable, one thing that just doesn't sit with me whenever I watch anything that tries to utilize horror. For example, I'll give you guys an actual example. It's the old film Sleepy Hollow with Johnny Depp.
Okay.
So the ending scene wherein the writer gets his head back, blah blah blah. He get I keep saying blah blah blah. I gotta stop that. He gets his head back. He sits on his horse. He picks up the somewhat unconscious witch that summoned him. He makes out with her, bites like with his sharp ass teeth, bites into her, sucking her blood, and then rides off into the tree, which is all like bodies opening up, saying time to go back to the underworld, and then they go right back in, and the only thing left is the witch's hand. So I found that a little, I don't know why, just with me, it just felt very unsettling because it's just like it's just going in. Maybe it is body dysmorphia that just bothers me when it comes to that, especially like whenever I see I don't know, monsters that are eating humans whole, stuff like that, or if any of you guys saw the movie Scary Stories We Tell One Another, there's just this, like, how do I describe it, blob of a person, like this very very pale fat blob of a person, not even chasing this kid who's running around in circles, or he's trying to escape but he can't, is just walking really slowly, and when she gets the kid, she literally just sucks him into her, like, gone. That's what I mean by body dysmorphia to a degree, and I don't know why, but I just, every time I see that, I'm like, a little shudder.
Well, hey, you'll love this series.
No, I will not do it. I'm not the father.
For now.
Well, so far, what we've described that we don't like in horror is mostly Western related, which
Yeah.
is pretty nice to think of. That Japanese horror seems they put a lot more attention and care into what makes things scary, and the use of psychological horror, torture, and also supernatural is very well. It's very well done. It's very creative, and it's almost it's an art form. It's a pure art form in a way, at least from my perspective.
Agreed.
I do agree because that's the point. Is that when you treat something as an art instead of something to let's make cash out of this, you see it. You see the difference.
Of course.
That is why Saw, for example, is boring and it has like 6 movies.
I thought it was 8.
I think
That's-
it's more, but
Either way, it's too many.
Yeah.
that's my point. It's the fact that if this movie was good, like it would probably have like a lot less. And what I mean a lot less, I mean like 1 or 2 movies make sense, and sometimes there's 7 of them.
Oh, okay. I was pretty close, but with that being said,
Um,
Tensa, we're going over the time.
I'm sorry. We're done.
It's okay. You hear that, Hollywood? We don't like Saw. Suck it. And okay, with all that, I believe we've covered a good amount of ground in regard to horror, especially for our episode dedicated to the month of Halloween, the month of horror as we know it. So I want to thank all listeners who took time out of their day to listen or watch, watch on our YouTube channel this particular episode. I found it was a really engaging discussion. There was a lot of interesting points being brought up, a lot of old school animes being referred to. I don't know much about Junji Ito, but now I do, and I found it was very informative as well. So you can, as always, you can find all of our content online on Spotify, our Anchor link, Google Podcasts, Castbox, and where else? Our YouTube channel, and yeah, just look for the microphone icon, our basically our mark of distinction, which separates us from any other YouTube channel that has the Otaku Crew name. We are the official Otaku Crew. You can find us as well as Instagram and Twitter. Think Otaku Crew, our Facebook page as well, the Otaku Crew podcast. So once again, thank you for tuning in, and we'll see you on the next episode. Peace out.
Peace, guys.
Bye bye.